Hi everyone and welcome to BODHI. My name is Alex Nashton and this is Chris Yates, and we're going to be moving through a 45-minute long beginner's foundation class. So for today's practice, you're going to want to have 2 blocks. If you don't have blocks at home and you've taken my class before, at this point you probably heard me say 1,000 times here on our YouTube channel that you can use anything that you've got at home. So you can use old shoe boxes, old textbooks, you can use those old DVD sets if you have any of them hanging around. And then you'll also want to be sure that you have something squishy nearby, like a blanket or a pillow or a bolster, and I think that's pretty much it. Yep, that's it. That's all that you're going to need for today. Come to a comfortable seated position. I usually sit like this in supported virasana, which means that your knees are together and the tops of your feet are on the ground, kind of in a kneeling shape, except the feet are a little bit wider apart than inner hip distance. So I usually put a block between my ankles on the lowest, flattest setting. But if that's uncomfortable for your knees, you can definitely elevate your seat up onto a second or maybe even a third block. Otherwise, you can just cross your ankles in front of you. That works as well. I do recommend that whatever seat you land in is one where your hips can be elevated just a little bit above the levels of the knees, especially for those of you that have really tight hips or hip flexors. You're going to want to have that support. And then once you've come into that seat, you'll close your eyes. You'll let your face relax, your shoulders relax. You'll find softness in the most superficial layers of your body, but from your deep core, from the innermost part of you, you'll find this strength and stability and rise. So can you lift up a little bit higher through both your sternum and the crown of your head? Can you relax your breath just a tiny bit more? And for today's practice, we're going to work to find a little more activation, a little more energy in the beginning by using a breathing technique called Kapalabhati, meaning shining skull breath or breath of fire. If you are pregnant or have any sort of abdominal stuff going on right now, you might just want to sit this one out. You might just want to breathe very easily. But if you're feeling ready to get into it, know that it's going to be an active exhale and a passive inhale. So you're forcing the breath out, but the breath in will come on its own. Again, you push the breath out, but the inhale happens naturally, and that whole process is going to happen pretty quickly. So before we get into it, I'm going to have you lift your arms up into a big V shape, and you'll curl your fingertips in towards your finger knuckles. So the palms of your hands are stretched open, your thumbs are reaching up towards the sky, but just the 4 fingertips curl in towards the pads of the hands. And now as you have that shape in your fingers, you plug your thumbs up towards the heavens, you close your eyes if they open, you take a full breath in, a long breath out. And then Chris and I will demonstrate it first before you get into it. You'll inhale just halfway. And then you'll begin by forcing your breath out. You pump your belly button back towards your spine. It'll sound like this and look like this. So by pumping your belly button back towards your spine, you force the breath out, 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 out. Good. And so as you continue on with it, you'll find that same lift up through the front of your chest, space between your collarbones. Your thumbs are reaching up as your fingertips curl in towards your finger knuckles, and then you stay with it. So still forcing the breath up and out, up and out, up and out, up and out. And as you do, you send your awareness up to the crown of your head. We'll stay with it just a little bit longer. For 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a big breath in, hook your thumbs up overhead, reach your other 8 fingers straight up to the sky, and then pause at the peak of your inhale. Pull your pelvic floor in and up like you're trying not to pee your pants. Pull your belly button in and up. Take your chin in towards your throat and lift a little bit higher through the back of your skull. One more inhale here. So your lungs are at full capacity. You send all of your awareness up to the crown of your head, and then like you were popping champagne, you exhale and let it go. You let your arms relax down to your thighs and give yourself a moment just to rest in the wake of that experience, just to feel the shift, just to feel the change. And to feel your heart beating even faster, your lungs working a little bit harder. You might sense some heat or some perspiration kind of bubbling up on the skin. And then in your own time, you'll release your chin down to your chest. You'll blink your eyes open. You'll sit your hips over to one side, and if you were seated on a block or seated on a pillow, you can slide that out of your way. You'll swing your legs around in front of you. So the knees are bent, the soles of the feet are on the ground before you. Your hands are going to come to the ground back behind you, and you're going to flip your fingertips to face your hips here. As you inhale, you'll push down through your hands, you'll push down through the soles of your feet and lift your hips up towards the sky. Your tailbone will lengthen towards the space between your knees. Your gaze can either be between your knees or straight up towards the sky. I don't really recommend that you just drop your head back, but that you maintain some level of engagement here. Now, as you exhale, you'll let your hips settle back down to the ground, and we're gonna engage the core just a little bit more. So as you inhale, you'll lift the soles of the feet up off of the floor. So shins are parallel with the earth beneath you. Your belly button squeezes in towards your spine. You lift up higher through the front of your chest. And then you exhale and release your feet back down. Inhale, push down through your hands, push down through your feet, lift your hips up. Exhale, release your hips back down. Inhale, your feet lift up. Shins parallel with the ground, belly button squeezes in towards your spine, and then you exhale to release back down again. And we're going to do that 3 more times. So inhale, lift your hips. Exhale, hips back down. Inhale, feet lift up. Try to keep your chest lifted. Exhale, feet release back down again. Inhale, lift your hips. Exhale, hips release back down. Inhale, feet lift up. Exhale, release your feet back down again. Last time, inhale, lift your hips. Exhale, hips settle back down. 1 more. Inhale, lift your feet. Exhale, feet release back down. Now you'll very gently let your knees windshield wiper from side to side. Good. So just kind of moving the hips in a different direction than the one they were just going in. Now you can cross your ankles in front of you, and you'll bring yourself up and over onto all fours. From all fours, you're going to walk your hands out just a little further in front of your shoulders. Palms of the hands are pushing down into the floor beneath you, and now I want you to draw an imaginary line from your middle finger down to the center of each wrist. And then parallel those two imaginary lines with the two side edges of the mat. So for some of you, that might mean that you need to kind of turn your hands out a little bit. For some of you, it might mean that you need to turn your hands in, but that's going to help you find your own anatomical neutral in this shape. Once you've got it, you'll tuck your toes under and push your hips up and back into a downward facing dog. Really find that downward motion through the palms of your hands. Use that to lengthen out your arms, to elevate your hips. And then put a little bit of a bend into your knees, just so we can take the rounding out of the lower back. Now you can either reach your heels down towards the ground, or you can find a little more lift in the heels, whatever helps you find space in the lowest part of your spine. And we want to be sure here that the feet are even, so Chris, you can step your left foot just a ½ an inch forward. Yeah, there we go. Okay. From here, you'll breathe in and bring yourself forward to a plank pose. So your shoulders are over your wrists, your legs are completely straight back behind you. Belly button squeezes up in towards your spine, your chin is in ever so slightly towards your throat, and now you can drop your knees down to the ground. Move your shoulders forward past your wrists, and we're gonna slowly lower just halfway down, so bending your elbows to 90 degrees. You inhale and push yourself back up onto all fours. Good, we'll do that 2 more times. So shoulders slide forward at first, and then you exhale to bend your elbows straight back to 90 degrees. You inhale and push back up. 1 more time, shoulders forward, you exhale halfway down. Inhale, bring yourself back up. This time, toes tuck under, palms of the hands are down on the ground. You're gonna lift your hips up and back into another downward facing dog. So for the purposes of today's practice, because we are focusing on energizing and activating the nervous system, I want to be sure that we're doing poses and shapes that are a little more strength building and heat building for the purposes of today's practice. So from here, you can reach your right leg straight up and back behind you. Make sure that your hips are square. So Chris, can you demonstrate an open hip for me here? Yeah, we don't want this to be happening. So think about spinning your inner right thigh up towards the sky, your right toes turn down towards the ground. And now as you exhale, you'll curl your right knee in towards your nose, you'll dome your upper back, and as delicately as you can, you'll step your right foot forward between your hands. Very nice. Now you can drop your left knee down to the ground here, but know that if there is any tenderness or any sensitivity underneath the left knee, you might want to slide a pillow or a blanket underneath it just for a little extra cushioning. Untuck your left toes so the top of the left foot comes to the ground. And now as you breathe in, you'll walk your hands up on your right thigh, maybe even reaching your fingertips all the way up towards the sky, so maybe the arms stretch upward. Now, most of us, as we settle into these lunging positions, tend to find what we call an external rotation in the legs. It's the same kind of rotation outward that a ballerina would make as they move into first position or second position or fourth position. But I want, for today's practice, you guys to think about really staying in anatomical neutral, which in this particular shape translates to making sure that the pinky toenail of your left foot is anchored down to the ground. And then trying to revolve your left heel out to the left slightly and your inner left thigh back in space. And that'll help you find a little extra mobility so you can push your left hip forward as you slide your right hip back in space. Take 1 more inhale here. And then with your exhale, you'll release your hands down to the ground. And I usually like to grab blocks for this one, so if you have blocks handy, you'll grab those. I usually take them up onto the highest height as well. And the blocks can be directly underneath the shoulders. You'll tuck your back toes under, lift your back knee up. Firm your lifted back thigh, so engage the left thigh. And then using the mobility of this left ankle, you're just gonna shift your weight horizontally forward and back, and forward and back. So moving on that horizontal plane while still keeping the left thigh engaged, it enables you to kind of warm up and release this left hip, these left hip flexors just a little bit more. Beautiful. And then you'll pause with your left heel reaching back. And now you'll find a little more lift through the front of your chest, so you'll try to pull your heart forward and up just a tiny bit more. Good. Pause here. As you exhale, push down through the sole of the right foot, straightening out the right leg as much as you can. Draw both of your hips back and make sure they stay square. The right hip has a tendency here to kind of creep forward, but I want you to keep them level. Good, and then we're gonna move forward and back like that a few more times. So as you inhale, you bend into the right knee. Maybe you find a little more lift through the front of your chest. As you exhale, push down through the right foot, lengthen out the back of the right leg as much as you comfortably can. As you lengthen the right leg, make sure the big toe mound of your right foot stays glued down. For many of us, it kind of lifts up away from the floor here. Inhale, bend your right knee, find that little arch in your upper back. Try not to drop your left thigh down to the ground. Exhale, push down through the sole of the right foot, lengthen out the back of the right leg, and you'll do that 2 more times. So your inhale brings you forward. Your exhale lifts your hips up and back. Your inhale brings you forward. Your exhale lifts your hips up and back. Inhale, come forward here. And then you'll straighten your right leg 1 more time. You'll drop your left heel down to the ground so your toes are at about a 45-degree angle. You'll take your left hand to your left hip and then start to turn your chest towards the left side of the mat. Beautiful. Now make sure the big toe mound of your right foot is still anchored down. Nice. Now for most of us, coming into Trikonasana, coming into triangle pose from this last position makes it a really wide triangle. So if it's feeling unstable for you, you can walk your left foot in just a little bit closer to your right foot, shortening your stance a tiny bit more. Think about pulling your right hip away from your right armpit so your entire right side waist lengthens here. And then you'll extend your left fingertips up to the sky. Beautiful. And think about using your right and your left foot to pull the front and back ends of the mat towards each other. So you really have to energize and activate your legs a bit more. Now with your inhale, you can release your left hand to your left hip, bend into your right knee again. Bring your left hand down to frame your front foot so it finds its own respective block, and then you'll lift your back heel up so you come into a low lunge once again. Set your blocks aside. And then step your right foot back to meet your left foot. So coming into a plank pose. Knees drop down to the ground. Shoulders come forward past your wrists. You exhale to bend your elbows straight back, lower halfway down. Inhale, straighten your arms back to a plank pose. Knees lift. And now you'll exhale to a downward facing dog. This time you inhale your left leg up and back behind you. Be mindful of what's happening in that left hip, that you're not spinning it open, but that instead the hip stays square. So inner left thigh revolves up towards the sky. Your foot is flexed, so your heel reaches up as your toes draw back towards your face. And now as you exhale, you curl your left knee in towards your nose, doming your upper back. Step your left foot forward as delicately as you can. Your right knee comes down, you untuck the right toes. Good, and then you walk your hand up on your left thigh, maybe even reaching both arms up towards the sky, so maybe the arms frame the ears. Shoulders relax down your back. And once again, we want to be sure that the legs are not externally rotating in this lunge shape, but that we keep them truly square. So pinky toenail of the right foot anchors down. And that doesn't mean that you need to sickle the right foot. You can keep length through the inner arch of the right foot. Just make sure your pinky toenail connects with the ground. That your right heel kind of spins out to the right. And that your inner right thigh is revolving back in space, and that enables you to push your right hip forward. Good, we'll take 1 more breath in here. And then with your exhale, you can release your hands down. I like to grab blocks for this one. Tuck your right toes under. Lift your right knee up. As you inhale, you'll find a little more firmness in your right thigh. And then you'll start to just horizontally shift the weight of your body forward and back, and forward and back, and forward and back. So you keep your back thigh lifted, but use just the mobility of this right ankle to propel you forward and back. So eventually you'll pause with a 90-degree bend in your front knee, so your front knee is over your front ankle. You'll find a little more lift through the front of your chest, so a little more arch in the uppermost part of your back. Now keep your spine just like that. As you exhale, push down through your left foot, lengthen out the back of your left leg, draw your hips back, but keep your hips square. So rather than letting your right hip open here, you're gonna continue to push your right hip forward as the left hip draws back. Bend into your left knee. Inhale, reach your heart up. Exhale, push down through your left foot, lengthen out the back of your left leg. And you'll keep going just like that. And so not only do we want the hips to be square from side to side, but we want them to be level as far as up and down go. So make sure your right hip is just as high as your left hip here. Good, Chris. And you'll do that 3 more times. Big toe mound of the left foot anchors down. Now, when you finish that last round, you'll come forward once again. You'll drop your right heel down. Oh, I think we actually came into Trikonasana with the left leg straight. So straighten out your left leg again. And then you drop the right heel down. Yeah, that's it. Right hand comes to your right hip. You open your chest up to the right. So your left hand stays on your left block. If you feel like you need a little extra height here, you might take your left hand up onto your left shin. If the stance feels so wide here that it's almost unstable for you, you can walk your feet in a little bit closer towards each other. And then left hip draws away from your left armpit. So left waistline lengthens. Make space across the front of your chest, so space between your collarbones, and then maybe you extend right fingertips up to the sky and you widen your wingspan. Once again, you make sure that your heels are tractioning the front and back ends of the mat together. So you're dragging the left foot back energetically and the right foot forward. Make sure that you're breathing. Very nice. And then you can take your right hand to your right hip. You'll bend into your left knee. Now bring both hands down to frame your front foot. Square your hips so back heel revolves up. Set your blocks aside. Take your hands to the ground and step your left foot back to meet your right foot in a plank pose. Now this time you can either keep your knees lifted or you can drop them down. Know that if they're gonna stay lifted, try to keep them lifted the whole time, and then shoulders come forward past your wrists. You're high on your tiptoes. You bend your elbows straight back and lower halfway down. Inhale straight back up to a plank pose, and then exhale, downward facing dog. From this down dog, I'll give you some time to rest. So release your knees to the mat. The tops of your feet find the ground. Big toes touch, and you draw your hips back in the direction of your heels for a child's pose. Your forehead can either release down straight to the floor. If it doesn't make it to the floor on its own, you can slide a block underneath your forehead. That'll work as well. And know that if your hips don't quite find your heels, you can slide a pillow or a bolster or even a rolled up blanket between them for a little extra cushioning. And here in this shape, we are still breathing. So in your own time, you'll stretch the palms of your hands out onto the floor in front of you. You'll push down through your hands and ease yourself up to sit on your heels once again. From your heels, you'll shift your hips over to one side, swing your legs around in front of you. And now we're gonna work for Navasana or boat pose one more time. So hands are gonna come to the ground back behind you. The soles of your feet start on the ground. You're gonna lift up through the front of your chest. You do that by pushing down through the palms of your hands. Make sure that your core is engaged, so your belly button is squeezing in towards your spine. And now you lift one foot at a time up so the shins are parallel with the ground beneath you. Find some sort of activation in your legs, so I don't care if they're flexed or if they're pointed, or if you do what we call a foint here, which is pointing through the balls of the feet but flexing back through just the toes. Now you can either stay with your hands supporting you, or maybe you reach your fingertips forward. Working for balance just a little bit more here. Core stays engaged, chest is lifted. The shoulders are drawing down the back away from the ears. Take one more breath in. And now exhale, release your feet, release your hands down to the ground. Push down through your hands and feet. As you next inhale, you'll lift your hips up to the sky. And then you'll exhale and release your hips back down. Bring the soles of your feet together, take your knees apart, grab onto your ankles. And now as you breathe in, you work to find an arch in your spine. So pull your heart forward and up. As you exhale, you'll press the back of your heart towards the back of the mat and round your spine. So tailbone tucks under, chin curls into your chest. You hollow out your belly, and maybe your knees lift a few inches as well. As you inhale, you use a grip of your hands on your ankles to pull your heart forward and up to arch your spine. As you exhale, you round. You inhale and arch, shifting a little more weight forward towards your pubic bone. You exhale and round, shifting a little more weight back towards your tailbone. Inhale, come forward. Exhale, round. Inhale, find a lengthened spine, a neutral spine. And then you can draw your knees up so the soles of your feet find the ground. Grab onto the backs of your thighs, and one vertebra at a time, lower yourself down onto your back. Once you're on your back, you're going to bend into your knees if they left the ground. Soles of the feet stay firmly planted on the floor. You'll bring the palms of your hands down to frame your hips. And as the hands frame the hips, you can kind of use the measure of the length of your arms to feel where your feet are in space, and make sure that you can ever so slightly graze your heels with your fingertips. Press down through your triceps, press down through your upper arms, press down through the palms of your hands, press down through the soles of your feet, and engage your core, so belly button squeezes in towards the spine. You're gonna lift your hips just a few inches up off of the floor. So your lower back, your sacrum is just hovering here. As you keep it hovering, make sure that your inner thighs squeeze towards each other. Most of us let the knees kind of fall apart here, but I want you to think about keeping them in close. So keeping your knees directly over your ankles. And now as you lower down, can you feel one vertebra at a time, one bone in your back at a time, releasing all the way down to the floor. Once the back of your pelvis rests on the ground, you'll very gently windshield wiper your knees from side to side. So finding a little bit of movement in the lower back. Now, eventually you come back to center once again. You push down through your hands, you push down through your upper arms, you push down through the soles of your feet, engage your core, and lift your pelvis up off of the ground. And then start to lift into the middle part of your back as well. So you're about at 2/3 of the height of what you normally could lift to here. 2/3 of what the fullest expression of your bridge shape could be. Make sure palms of the hands are glued down, that you're still using the activation of your upper arms. So the hips are lifted and more of the middle back. Inner thighs are squeezing in close. Big toe mounds of the feet stay glued to the ground. And now one bone at a time, one vertebra at a time, you slowly release yourself down onto the floor. Once the back of your pelvis is level on the ground again, you windshield wiper your knees from side to side. Good. And we're going to come into one more bridge pose here, so make sure knees are over ankles. This one's going to be the highest one we've done so far, so activate your arms, press down through the palms of your hands. Chris, you can walk your feet in a little bit closer towards your butt so your ankles are beneath your knees. There we go. And now pushing down through the soles of your feet, you inhale and curl up one bone at a time. So lifting first the lower pelvis, the upper pelvis, the middle back, and then eventually as much of the upper back as you can, lifting up towards the sky. Your chest pushes up towards your chin. Your chin lifts ever so slightly away from your chest, so you still have space along the front and back of your throat. The sides of your neck can stay long. Breathe. And then one vertebra at a time, one bone at a time, you slowly release all the way back down to the ground. Once the back of your pelvis connects with the floor, you windshield wiper your knees from side to side. Good. Okay, so from here we're going to take a restorative bridge. So you're going to want to grab one of your blocks, and you're going to take it to the lowest, flattest setting underneath your sacrum. So sacrum is, just as a refresher, that flat triangular bone at the base of your spine just above your tailbone. And once you've got the block in the right setup, I encourage you to let the weight of your body release to gravity here. So to give the sacrum, to give the lower back permission to get heavy here. And to give the shoulders and the hands permission to hang heavy here. So you can either let the palms of your hands face up beside you, or you can bring your hands to your belly or to your chest like Chris is demonstrating. And because we've been doing so much work with our core today, I do want to be sure that your hip flexors are released, so you can slide your right foot out in front of you, lengthening out the right leg here. You'll start by flexing into your right foot, so as your heel reaches forward, your toes draw back towards your face. Spin your inner right thigh down so your leg is in a neutral position rather than turning out like a ballerina. So thigh engages, foot is flexed. And notice the little bit of tugging, the little extra pull that creates along the front of the right hip. Take another breath in here. And then with your exhale, you can relax the right leg. So you'll let your right toes kind of fall away from center, let the right knee kind of fall away from center. Let your right hip turn out ever so slightly, and notice the stretch that brings along the front of the right hip. How that changes things. You'll notice that in this relationship to gravity, with the hips elevated above the level of the heart, it kind of coaxes each exhale longer. It enables you to shift into more of a parasympathetic nervous system state, or a relaxation response, that rest and digest response. And in your own time, you'll put a bend into your right knee so the sole of your right foot finds the floor. You'll lengthen out your left leg, and as your heel reaches out, your toes will draw back towards your face. You'll firm your left thigh and notice what that activation and what that lengthening does to the front of the left hip. The impact that that kind of stretch has on your breath, whether it feels a little bit shorter than it did just a moment ago, or whether it perhaps feels a little more spacious. And for your last few moments in this shape, you'll let your left leg relax, so your knee kind of falls away from center, your foot turns out slightly, your thigh revolves out, your hip revolves open. You'll let your breathing get easier. And in your own time, you'll bend into your left knee again so the sole of your left foot finds the ground. And for our final resting shape today, you have not one, not two, but 3 options for how you want to complete your practice. So staying with the block underneath your sacrum, the first option would be to bring the soles of your feet together and let your knees come apart like you would in a butterfly shape, what we call BODHI Ohana in Sanskrit. Know that with the hips elevated up on the block, this might be really intense for you, so you definitely don't have to take this variation if it's really uncomfortable. The second option would be for you to not take the butterfly shape at all, but instead to lengthen out your legs, almost like you would in a Shavasana, but with your hips on the block. If this puts any crunching, if this puts any compression on your lower back, I don't want you to take this option. I'd rather have you skip it. The third option would be to bend your knees so the soles of your feet find the ground, and to lift your hips up, to slide the block out of the way, and then to let your hips come back to the floor and move into a more traditional Shavasana. So lengthening out through the legs, letting the palms of the hands face up beside you. You let your eyelids get heavy. You let your eyes soften. And whether you chose a traditional Shavasana or the butterfly shape with your hips elevated on the block, give yourself permission to just kind of rest in the sensation you feel along the front of your torso, particularly the uppermost part of your belly down to the tops of your thighs. And how the movement of your breath changes this part of you. How do you breathe here? Now, if you found yourself in one of the positions where the block was still underneath you, You're going to bend your knees so the soles of your feet find the ground. Lift your hips up, slide the block out of the way, and then let your hips settle back down on the floor. If you are in a traditional Shavasana, you'll also bend into your knees until the soles of your feet find the ground. And then everyone can really gently gather the knees into the chest so the lower back lengthens. And then you can kind of massage out the lower back. Circling the knees around a few times in one direction and then a few times the other way. And eventually you'll roll over onto one side, making a fetal position. You'll press down through one hand at a time and bring yourself up to sit. From that seat, you'll bring the palms of your hands to touch at heart center, release your chin down, and find some gratitude for whatever part of you brought you to the mat. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everyone. Namaste.